Hi everyone. I realised this week that I need to hand back in my passport as a Brit because I have never seen Life of Brian, Monty Python's parody of the Jesus story. So I decided, given that it is the season at Easter, to rectify that, and today I sat down and watched it. And I'm so glad I did. What a complete masterpiece, an immortal entry in the canon of satire and comedy. Two things really surprised me about it that I'd like to talk about. One is that it is so contemporary and it tells us so much about where we are and where we were at the time when it was made in 1979. And I think those dates go interestingly together, where we are now and that date, especially in UK history, because it's when we elected Margaret Thatcher. And the second point really for me was how much we can learn about how to make satire, how satire actually works in an era where parody videos and the sophistication of irony and the various ways in which we're all taking each other off all the time is probably more complex now than it's ever been. This film still has a lot to teach us about how to build effective and uh, really lasting comic effect and satire. So, first of all, on the subject of its contemporary kind of force, I mean, the opening is hilarious. Sidebar for a second, the opening is just hilarious, which is that the three wise men appear with their gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and basically give it to the wrong woman. We're basically at the third barn down on the left. The Holy Family is up there on the right, and the Brian and his mother are somewhere else along the row. And so basically, the wise men come back and they grab their gold, frankincense, and myrrh back again, and then take it to the Holy Family, who've got the halos shining around their heads. But you know what? Brian grows up, and in the second scene of the film, he becomes a guy who hands out snacks at the Colosseum type space, the amphitheatre where all the gladiators go to be killed. And he's handing out these snacks, and he comes across this group who react very angrily, and this is a very famous scene, to being asked, "Are you the Judean People's Front?" And they're like, "No, fuck off, we're the People's Front of Judea. We've got nothing to do with those capitalist pig dogs." That's not the actual phrase they use. Those imperialist lackeys. It's great, it's really funny. But as they get into their debates, and we see it happen in the space of the amphitheatre, and we also see it happen around a table they sit around later, you realize they are going to be arguing about how many radical angels dance on the head of a pin before they do anything about the Roman invasion, before they do anything to really resist imperialism. And the people they really hate are each other, other leftist, what we would think of as leftist factions. There's a great moment where they're going to go and kidnap Pilate's wife, and that's going to be, finally they're going to make a genuine radical gesture that could bear fruit. But of course, another radical group is also trying to kidnap Pilate's wife, so it's never going to happen because they're too busy fighting each other. I mean, it's contemporary not only because it's about the left tearing itself to shreds instead of resisting an armed imperialist right wing that is taking over the whole world. I mean, who could say how that resonates with us? But also because it's about public space. It's about how we inhabit the public sphere. When I looked at that amphitheatre, which is such a great place to set that scene, it's one of the third spaces, if you like, of Roman civilization in its imperial form. It's a place where people go to talk to each other, as well as a place where they go to look at people being eaten by various kinds of predator and destroyed. What else is social media? It's a public sphere where you sit around and talk, diagonally to each other while you're all out of the corner of your eye watching that week's set of sacrifices being shredded. And that idea that within that public sphere, what ends up mattering most is who you set yourself up against. that there's something about the public sphere that naturally fractures under political pressure. I mean, when you go back to the 18th century, when you started to get political parties in this country, that was because you had coffee houses and you had a printing press. You had all of these means to define yourself against the arguments of your enemies and to create factions. I'm being a little simplistic there, but you can see Monty Python reading ahead to say it doesn't matter whether these people are gathered in private around a table or whether they're gathered in an amphitheatre. We are going to be stuck with these dynamics because little did they know, but the boundary between the private space of discussion and the public sphere of debate was going to break down through the invention of the internet and social media, so that we're all permanently in an amphitheatre. And actually, unless we come to terms with that about how we talk to each other, we are going to continue to find mass mobilization very difficult. Fortunately for the People's Front of Judea, the empire itself is run by incompetents who are unable to manage the theatrical or administrative elements of empire. So what is revealed by the film, I know I'm being really po-faced about this, by the way, it's fucking hilarious, but I'm just focusing on some of the things I saw that I hadn't expected to see. And, you know, it's amazing how they get to the core of the idea that empire is about two things. One is how you operate within communities, whether or not you understand the lay of the land, whether or not you have a kind of granular sense of how those communities work. The American empire has failed. There's another film out this week called Warfare, which I haven't seen because I get very bored of films about war. I mean, we know it's hell, and I'm not sure I can face seeing that again for 2.5 hours. But in the end, what all those films about Iraq must surely acknowledge is that America didn't know the lay of the land well enough. It didn't understand the people, just like in Vietnam. Imperial arrogance brings down empires. Took a hell of a lot longer in Rome for that to happen, but the reality is that what we see in this is incompetent soldiers going around trying to police the area, but being outwitted because they literally can't handle the physical space. There's a great bit where the guy playing Jesus, what's his name? Graham Chapman, who very sadly died young. He is running through the market, and he gets stuck with this guy who insists that he haggle with him over buying a disguise. He's running away from the Roman legionaries, and he's buying a beard to disguise himself. And this guy's so insistent he haggle with him that he's saved from the Roman legionaries because he's sucked into this debate. He's kind of off the road inside the marketplace having this debate, and they run by without seeing him. Then he falls out of a window and onto a preacher. So he then stands up on this dais, having knocked the guy off, and he then becomes a preacher, which is another great statement about public space, which is basically that the Roman legionaries miss him again because no one sees the preachers. No one pays any attention to the preachers. If you want to be invisible, stand up on a dais. Talking of standing on a dais, you then have Pontius Pilate, who can't say his R's and says W instead, and doesn't understand why the crowd keeps asking him to free someone called Roderick, and why they keep doubling up in laughter every time he says it. In other words, the Romans are neither managing the political, social elements of empire very well, nor the theatrical communication elements of empire, both of which are important. They've got the infrastructure down, as someone says to someone else in the Judean People's Front. Well, we owe the Romans nothing except, aqueducts and roads. They've got the, which made me laugh, but they've got the infrastructure elements right, but they don't have any of the subtler elements of successful imperialism, right? So in that sense, it's an anti-imperial film because what it does is it subjects the entire enterprise to satire. Everything about it becomes completely absurd. And that is as true for empire as it is for its enemies. I think that, in other words, this is a sort of anthropological satire. It's a satire that looks at the layers of social life and the way the state works. It really does, guys. I know that sounds ridiculously pompous about the life of Brian, but it really does, and it's brilliant at it. And that brings me to my final point, which is what can we learn from this about how we make satire today? Well, what really struck me was that these people who made this, despite the fact it has a kind of, at times irritating, kind of swaggering Cambridge footlights, Oxbridge kind of quality, of sort of, you know, let's make fun of everyone in a slightly slapdash way. Actually, they care about every element of this film. They've really thought, what are we going to do with them when they're on the cross? It's hilarious what happens when he's on the cross. But who would have thought of singing Always Look on the Bright Side of Life at that moment? The reason that works is because it's not just funny, it's also profoundly sad. And it layers the tones in the film in a really interesting way. The other thing about the film, apart from its immense attention to detail like that, the fact that no opportunity to keep the tone dynamic is missed. And actually, I say that a couple of times in the middle, it gets a bit repetitious, and immediately it stops being funny. You cannot repeat a joke too many times. You have to find a new angle and you have to find a new tone. And it mostly is relentless in trying to do that. But the other aspect of it is a strange parallel between satire and colonialism, if you'll forgive the parallel, which is that you have to know the ground that you are trying to attack. You have to know that for example, here you cannot have no respect for Christianity at all and make this film. I assumed this film would be contemptuous of Christianity, but actually it isn't. It's profoundly, in some ways, it's profoundly buys into some aspects of what Christianity is about, because at every moment where something sacred, something that Christians presumably hold very, very significant, is subjected to this silliness, the silliness of obscenity, of dirty jokes, of silly voices. Actually, that's a kind of incarnational aesthetic. It really is. It's the body coming back. It might not be coming back tragically and horrifically as it does for Christ in the story, but it comes back in another way. It's a reassertion of the incarnation, actually, this satire. So in a bizarre way, it kind of comes out quite Christian. And I myself, I'm not a Christian, but I am a Brit, and I do really love the fact that we produced this. I think it's one of our funniest movies. It has its problems, but I think it's one of our funniest films, and it does make me think that just at that moment when the left was so divided and had shown itself so unable to cope with contemporary problems in this country in 1979, that was the moment that we elected Margaret Thatcher. Now, in my opinion, that was a gift to the empire of late capitalism, a huge gift from which we have yet to recover. Just my view. Happy Easter, and thanks for listening.